A 4-year-old beggar girl was being burned with a hot spoon every day, but a millionaire saw everything. You won't believe what he did. Comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. For my story, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The shriek sliced through the humid afternoon air like a blade, echoing off the bustling streets of downtown Manhattan. The sound emanated from a small figure huddled on the sidewalk, a 4-year-old girl who looked barely 2, so fragile and tiny she resembled a wounded sparrow trying to hide among the paving stones. 30-year-old widower and millionaire Sterling Mallory adjusted the cuffs of his Italian shirt as he strode purposefully down Fifth Avenue, his leather shoes clicking a steady rhythm on the asphalt. Resembling a Hollywood heartthrob, dark hair perfectly coiffed, a chiseled jaw, and an athletic build that drew attention wherever he went. He was completely absorbed in a business call when the little figure stumbled right in front of him. The iced latte he was holding flew in all directions, staining his designer suit and splattering on the hot pavement. The girl fell to her knees, her enormous eyes filling with terror as she realized what she had done. Her ragged, dirty clothes contrasted sharply with the sophisticated atmosphere of the financial district. "Sorry, mister," she mumbled in a raspy voice, trying to stand on her wobbly legs. "Didn't mean to, I swear." Before the businessman could fully process what had happened, a woman of about 40 appeared like a storm. Her disheveled hair swayed as she approached with heavy steps, her face contorted with rage. In her right hand, she held a metal spoon that gleamed in the scorching afternoon sun. "You useless little pest," the cruel stepmother screeched, grabbing the girl's skinny arm hard enough to leave marks. "Look what you did. You dirtied the rich man's clothes." The millionaire watched in growing shock as the woman raised the spoon. For the first time in years, since he had built his empire of investments and stock market shares, he felt completely paralyzed. His net worth in dollars, his deals, all his accumulated wealth, none of it mattered at that moment. "Please, there's no need," he tried to interject, but it was too late. The metal spoon, heated by the relentless sun, touched the delicate skin of the child's small arm. The scream that followed was something the businessman would never forget, a sound of pure pain that cut through his soul like a sword. A red mark instantly appeared on the girl's fair skin, and she bit her lower lip to keep from crying louder. "That's to teach you to be careful," the stepmother snarled, completely ignoring the elegant man who was watching everything with growing horror. "Now you'll have to beg twice as long to make up for the damage." The girl nodded quickly, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. She knew the routine well. Any protest or resistance would only make her situation worse. With mechanical movements, she extended her small hand toward the millionaire, whispering an automatic request for some change. The businessman felt something awaken inside him, something that had remained dormant since the tragic loss of his wife 2 years earlier. Without thinking twice, he pulled out his wallet and handed a bill of considerable value to the stepmother. "Here," he said with a tense voice. "It's more than enough to pay for the latte." The woman snatched the money from his hands greedily, her eyes shining in a way that disturbed him. "Thank you, sir. The girl is clumsy, but she's learning." "Learning what exactly?" he asked, watching as the child continued to tremble. "To fend for herself, right? We don't have much, so she needs to help with what she can." The answer was accompanied by a fake smile that didn't reach the stepmother's eyes. As the days passed, the millionaire found himself unable to forget that scene. During his business meetings, while analyzing profit and dividend reports, the image of the girl haunted his thoughts. He began to subtly alter his daily route, passing by the same street where the encounter had taken place. That's how he discovered the terrible routine. Every day, around 3 in the afternoon, the screams echoed again. The stepmother used different heated objects, spoons, coins, small pieces of metal, to burn the child's skin whenever she didn't bring enough money from the streets. The perverse method had become a form of systematic torture, designed to break any resistance from the girl and force her to beg with more desperation. The businessman spent entire nights unable to sleep, confronted by a reality that his world of privileges had never shown him. His wealth, built through smart investments and calculated decisions, seemed insignificant in the face of the suffering of an innocent child. On the sixth time he witnessed the torture from a distance, he could no longer contain himself. He approached the pair with determination, interrupting the cruel ritual with a proposal that would change everything. "How much do you want to stop this?" he asked directly to the stepmother, who was holding a heated coin over a lit candle. The woman looked at him with surprise and renewed interest, immediately realizing the opportunity that had arisen. A calculating smile spread across her face as she processed the endless possibilities that this rich man represented. "Depends," she replied slowly, "on how much you're willing to pay." At that moment, watching the hopeful eyes of the girl turn to him as if he were a guardian angel, the millionaire knew that his life had changed forever. But he still had no idea that this would be just the first of many shocking discoveries that awaited him. During the following weeks, the businessman established a routine that he never imagined having. Every afternoon, around 2:30, he cancelled appointments and deviated from his usual route to pass through the streets where the girl used to beg. His drivers and assistants began to wonder about these sudden changes in his rigorously controlled schedule, but he offered vague excuses about checking on investments in the area. The first disturbing discovery came when he decided to discreetly follow the pair home. The stepmother and the child walked through increasingly narrow and dirty alleys, moving away from the commercial center towards a slum that stretched across the hills of the city. There, among shacks made of wood and tin, he discovered that they lived in a tiny, windowless room where the smell of mildew mixed with the odor of spoiled food. Hidden behind a pile of rubble, the millionaire watched through a crack in the wall as the stepmother brought in a pot of boiling water. The girl, who had only brought a few coins that day, was forced to hold her hands over the hot steam while the woman yelled about her laziness and incompetence. "Tomorrow you'll get more," said the stepmother coldly, "or you'll experience something worse than this." That night, the businessman couldn't touch the food served in his luxurious apartment. The image of the child silently enduring that torture haunted him, contrasting brutally with the comfort of his life, surrounded by expensive artwork and imported furniture. His investments in gold and cryptocurrencies seemed absurdly irrelevant when compared to the urgency of saving a life. The next day, he made a decision that would completely change his routine. Instead of just watching, he started buying food directly for the girl. Sandwiches, fruits, juices, small gestures that made the child's eyes shine with gratitude. But her joy was always interrupted by the stepmother's furious looks, who saw each act of kindness as a threat to her control. It was during one of these interactions that the first twist happened. While handing a sweet bread to the girl, the businessman overheard a conversation between the stepmother and another homeless person. The woman was complaining about how she had found the pest abandoned in a dumpster 3 years ago and how she had now become a good investment. "You found her on the street?" asked the man, counting some dirty coins. "Found her crying near Mount Sinai Hospital. The mother must have been some addict who didn't want anything to do with her. I thought about taking her to the authorities, but then I saw that she earned a few bucks begging." The stepmother laughed cruelly. "Best deal I ever made." The millionaire felt his blood run cold. The child was not the woman's daughter or relative. She had simply been picked up like a discarded object and turned into a source of income through exploitation. The whole dynamic he had observed took on an even more sinister dimension. Determined to find out more about the girl's origin, he began asking discreet questions around Mount Sinai Hospital. The second twist came when a retired nurse vaguely remembered a case from 3 years ago, A teenage girl had given birth and disappeared during the early hours of the morning, leaving the baby in the nursery without any documentation. "It was very strange," said the woman, nervously rummaging through her purse. "The girl seemed desperate. She was saying nonsensical things about not being able to take care of the child. When dawn came, we only found the baby and a note apologizing." "And what happened to the child?" asked the businessman, feigning casual interest. "She was supposed to go to a temporary home, but there was a mix-up in the paperwork. Someone said that a relative had appeared to pick up the baby, but we never managed to confirm it. The case ended up being shelved." The puzzle was forming, and each piece revealed a more brutal reality. The girl had been officially forgotten by the system, becoming invisible to the eyes of society. Without documents, without records, without a known family, she existed only as a shadow in the streets, completely dependent on the cruelty of the one who had rescued her. While processing this information, the millionaire came across another shocking discovery. One of his construction companies was scheduled to demolish a set of abandoned buildings in downtown Manhattan, exactly the place where several street children, including the girl, took refuge during the coldest nights. He had personally signed the demolition order weeks ago, thinking only about the profits that the valued land would bring to his business. Now, watching the girl and other children playing among the rubble of what was left of those buildings, he understood how his business decisions directly affected the most vulnerable people. The irony was cruel. The same man who was trying to help the child was also responsible for destroying one of the few places where she found shelter. His investments and financial applications had real consequences in the lives of real people, something he had never considered in his air-conditioned boardrooms. The third small twist happened unexpectedly. The girl, who initially ran away whenever she saw him approaching, began to recognize him and even smile shyly when he appeared. During a particularly hot afternoon, she approached him spontaneously. "Pretty mister," she said with her tiny voice. "Thank you for the snacks. You're different from other people." The businessman felt something break inside his chest. The innocence of that child, her ability to find kindness amidst so much suffering, touched a part of his soul that had remained frozen since the loss of his wife. For the first time in 2 years, he felt tears burning his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to be at her height. "Auntie doesn't let me tell my name to strangers," she replied, looking nervously around. "But can I call you Heart Dad?" The innocent question hit him like a lightning bolt. At that moment, watching that fragile child who had survived so much horror and still managed to offer affection, the millionaire knew that there was no turning back. He couldn't simply continue giving handouts and pretending that he was helping. He needed to find a way to definitively get her out of that situation. But as the days passed, he discovered that saving the girl would be much more complicated than he had imagined. The stepmother, realizing the businessman's growing interest in the child, began making increasingly larger demands. What had started as occasional requests for money turned into systematic blackmail. "If you want me to be nicer to her," the woman said with a calculating smile, "you're going to have to help me more. Raising a child is expensive, right? And she's growing, eating more." The millionaire found himself trapped. The more he paid, the more dependent the stepmother became on his money. And even worse, the more he showed interest in the girl, the more bargaining power the cruel woman acquired over him. She had discovered his weakness and was determined to exploit it to the limit. The months that followed brought a dangerous escalation in the dynamic between the businessman and the stepmother. What had started as spontaneous gestures of compassion turned into a cruel game of emotional blackmail. The woman had realized that the rich man was genuinely concerned about the girl's well-being and decided to use that feeling as a tool for extortion. "The little one needs new clothes," she said every week, extending her dirty hand towards the millionaire. "And medicine too. She's been coughing a lot at night. She must be getting sick from being on the street so much. The businessman knew that most of the money he gave never reached the child, but he felt powerless in the face of the implicit threat. Every time he hesitated to pay, the stepmother made a point of demonstrating her cruelty in front of him, heating metal objects or threatening to leave the girl without food for days on end. During this period, his professional life began to suffer. Important meetings were cancelled, investments were no longer followed adequately, and his partners began to question his decisions. His net worth continued to grow through automatic applications and investment funds, but his attention was completely focused on the streets. It was during one of these daily visits that he discovered something that completely changed his perspective on the situation. Hidden behind a dumpster, he observed a conversation between the stepmother and an unknown woman. The stranger had a prominent belly. She was clearly pregnant and spoke in a low tone about preparations for the future. "When this one is born," said the stepmother, stroking her own belly, "I'll have 2 working for me. The rich man likes children so much that he'll pay double." The revelation hit the businessman like a punch to the stomach. The woman was pregnant and was already planning to use the future baby in the same cruel way that she exploited the girl. Even worse, she had coldly calculated that 2 children generating pity and handouts would earn more money, especially considering the millionaire's generosity. That night, he spent hours walking through his luxurious apartment, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. His investments in stocks and cryptocurrencies seemed grotesquely insignificant compared to the urgency of preventing another child from being condemned to that terrible fate. The first medium twist came when he decided to try a legal approach. He sought out a law firm specializing in adoption and guardianship cases, determined to find an official way to get the girl out of that situation. But the response he received was devastating. "Sir, without official documents or a birth certificate, this child technically doesn't exist in the system," explained the lawyer, flipping through the papers on her desk. "To initiate any legal process, we would first need to establish her identity and citizenship." "But is that possible?" he asked, clinging to any hope. "It's a long and complex process. It can take years, and even then there's no guarantee of success. Also, if the woman who possesses her can prove some kind of family connection or informal guardianship, she would have legal priority." The bureaucratic obstacle seemed insurmountable. The same system that was supposed to protect vulnerable children was preventing him from saving a life because of legal technicalities. His fortune, capable of solving practically any business problem, proved completely useless in the face of the slowness and inflexibility of justice. Determined to find another solution, he hired private investigators to find out more about the girl's origin. The second medium twist came 2 weeks later, when the detectives brought a detailed report on their findings. "We found the biological mother," said the lead investigator, spreading photographs on the table. "Her name is... well, she prefers not to reveal her real name. She was a 15-year-old teenager when she got pregnant, addicted to hard drugs, without family, living on the streets." "Where is she now?" asked the businessman, studying the images of a thin girl with a lost look. "Missing. After abandoning the baby at the hospital, she simply disappeared. Some homeless people said they saw her a few times in the first few months, but after that, nothing. She probably left for another city or—" The investigator didn't finish the sentence, but both knew what the implication was. In the streets, people disappeared constantly, and not always for reasons that allowed hope of reunion. The third medium twist happened when the millionaire decided to directly confront the stepmother about her future intentions. During a particularly tense afternoon, after paying another exorbitant amount for the girl's medications, he finally exploded. "What do you really want?" he asked, his voice full of accumulated frustration. "How much money will be enough for you to leave this child alone?" The woman laughed cruelly, revealing yellowed and missing teeth. "Leave her alone? Sir, you don't understand anything. She's my source of income. Why would I get rid of my best investment? She's a child, not an investment. For you, maybe. For me, she's what keeps me alive. And now that another one is coming," she said, caressing her belly, "I'll have even more reason to keep my little workers close." The fourth medium twist came completely unexpectedly. The girl, who always kept her distance from other homeless people on the stepmother's instructions, began to interact with other children who lived in the area. It was through these friendships that the businessman discovered that the situation was even more complex than he had imagined. A boy of about 8 years old approached him during one of his visits, whispering information that made his blood run cold. "Mister, the bad woman is going to sell the little girl to some men from another city. I heard her talking on the phone last night." The revelation that the stepmother was literally planning to sell the child to strangers brought a desperate urgency to the situation. The businessman realized he no longer had time for legal or bureaucratic solutions. He needed to act immediately, even if it meant entering completely unknown territory. That night, for the first time since building his financial empire, he felt utterly helpless. All his resources, all his experience negotiating and solving complex problems seemed inadequate to face the brutal reality of the streets. His wealth could buy entire companies, but it couldn't buy the safety of an innocent child. While watching the city lights through his apartment windows, millionaire Sterling Mallory made a decision that would change everything. If the legal system couldn't help him, and if money was only feeding the stepmother's greed, he would need to find a completely different way to save Ivy. But first, he needed to find out exactly when and to whom the child would be sold. And that meant infiltrating even deeper into the shadowy world he had discovered, taking risks his privileged life had never prepared him to face. The silent war between his conscience and his comfort zone was about to enter a new, much more dangerous phase than anything he had faced so far. The discovery that Ivy was to be sold turned the businessman into an obsessed man. He cancelled important business trips, delegated crucial decisions to his partners, and spent almost all his time monitoring the stepmother's movements. His investments in bitcoins and applications in the financial market continued to generate profits automatically, but his attention was completely focused on the dirty streets where an innocent child lived under constant threat. Over the next 2 weeks, he developed a surveillance routine he never imagined being able to maintain. He arrived at work before dawn to resolve urgent issues, then spent the rest of the day disguised among the homeless, observing and gathering information. He bought old, used clothes, let his beard grow, and learned to move through the streets without drawing attention. It was through this constant surveillance that he discovered disturbing details about the stepmother's plan. The woman had established contact with a couple from a distant city who were interested in adopting a small, obedient girl. The telephone conversations, which he managed to partially record by hiding near the shack where they lived, revealed that the deal would involve a substantial amount of money. "She's very tiny, doesn't even look 4 years old," the stepmother said on the phone, her voice full of false maternal concern. "She's obedient, doesn't cause trouble, and she's used to working to help the family. You won't have any problems with her." The businessman recorded every word, feeling a mixture of disgust and despair growing in his chest. The way the woman described Ivy as a commodity, highlighting her submission and willingness to work, made it clear that the fate reserved for the child would be as terrible as her current situation. The first major twist came when he discovered that the transfer would happen in just 5 days. The information came through the 8-year-old boy who had become his reluctant informant. The child approached him during a rainy afternoon, whispering urgently, "Mister, she said that the little girl is going to travel far away the day after tomorrow. The men are going to pick her up at the Greyhound station in the early morning." "What men?" the millionaire asked, trying to control the anxiety in his voice. "I don't know. But I heard her saying that after she delivers the girl, she's going to use the money to buy things for the baby that's going to be born. She said it's going to be a very good deal." At that moment, the businessman realized that he had reached the limit of his ability to observe passively. 5 days were not enough for any legal process, no matter how much money he threw at the problem. He needed to act directly, and that meant confronting the stepmother in a way he had never considered before. That night, he drew up a desperate plan. Using his experience in business negotiations, he decided to make an offer the woman couldn't refuse. If she was selling the girl for money, he would simply offer more money than any buyer would be willing to pay. The next morning, he approached the pair with a direct proposal. "I want to adopt Ivy," he said bluntly, watching the stepmother's reaction. "Officially. How much do you want for it?" The woman looked at him with genuine surprise, clearly not expecting such a direct approach. Her calculating eyes shone as she processed the financial possibilities that this offer represented. "Adopt," she repeated slowly. "You know that's complicated, right? She's like a daughter to me. It would be very difficult to separate from her." The businessman immediately recognized the negotiation tactic. She was artificially inflating the emotional value to justify a higher price. It was exactly the kind of maneuver he used in his own business transactions. "How much?" he insisted, pulling a checkbook from his pocket. The stepmother remained silent for a long moment, her eyes moving between the checkbook and the determined face of the man in front of her. Finally, she mentioned an amount that made even the millionaire swallow hard. It was the equivalent of 2 years of profits from one of his smaller companies. "That's a lot of money," he said, feigning hesitation as he quickly calculated whether he had that amount available in his immediate accounts. "It's the price of raising a child with love and care," the woman replied with blatant cynicism. "And, of course, I would need a guarantee that she would be well cared for." The second obstacle arose when she continued to speak. The stepmother didn't just want the money. She wanted a permanent monthly payment to keep track of the girl's well-being and help with adaptation costs. It was a sophisticated form of ongoing blackmail, disguised as maternal concern. "You understand, right?" she said with a fake smile. "A mother never stops worrying. I would want to know how she is, visit from time to time, maybe help with school expenses and stuff like that." The businessman immediately recognized the trap. Even paying a fortune up front, he would be stuck in perpetual extortion. The woman had found a way to monetize not only the sale of the child, but also her continued absence. While pretending to consider the proposal, he watched Ivy playing with some pieces of wet cardboard, trying to turn them into small toys. The innocence of that child, her ability to find joy even in the most desperate situation, reinforced his determination to save her at any cost. "I need time to think," he said finally. "It's a very important decision." "Sure," replied the stepmother, "but don't take too long. Other people are also interested, and I can't wait forever." The threat was clear. Either he accepted her terms quickly, or the girl would be sold to the original buyers. It was an ultimatum, disguised as patience, and they both knew it. That afternoon, the millionaire locked himself in his office and spent hours on the phone with his lawyers and accountants, trying to find a legal way to structure the transaction without exposing himself to perpetual blackmail. But each consultation confirmed what he already suspected. There was no legal way to buy a child, especially one that didn't officially exist in the system. During the following days, the pressure increased exponentially. The stepmother began making daily calls, always with new emergencies that required additional payments. Ivy needed medical exams, special clothes for the transition, documents that cost a lot to be provided illegally. Each request was a new layer of extortion. But the businessman felt compelled to pay to keep the child safe while drawing up a definitive plan. His financial resources, built through years of careful investments and smart decisions in the stock market, were being drained by a woman who had turned child exploitation into an exact science. It was during one of these tense conversations that something happened that completely changed the course of the situation. Ivy, who normally stayed quiet during the adults' negotiations, approached the businessman and whispered something that made his heart stop. "Pretty mister," she said in her tiny voice, "I don't want to go away with the bad men. Can I stay with you forever?" The innocent question, made with total confidence that he could protect her, broke the last barrier of hesitation in his mind. At that moment, watching the hopeful eyes of that child who had learned to trust him, the millionaire knew he would do anything to save her. The girl's question echoed in the businessman's mind all night. He walked through the halls of his luxurious apartment, passing expensive paintings and imported furniture, but none of it seemed real compared to the urgency of saving an innocent life. His applications in international funds and his millionaire dividends became irrelevant abstractions in the face of that child's trusting gaze. The next morning, he made a decision that would forever change the course of events. Instead of continuing to negotiate with the stepmother, he drew up a completely different plan. If he couldn't buy the girl legally, and if each payment only fueled more blackmail, he would need to find a way to remove her from the situation without relying on the cruel woman's cooperation. The first step was to discreetly hire a team of investigators specializing in missing children cases. Not to find someone, but to create a temporary identity that would allow Ivy to officially exist in the system. His fortune, accumulated through smart investments in stocks and cryptocurrencies, finally found a purpose that transcended the simple accumulation of wealth. "I need you to do this completely legally," he instructed the investigators. "I want valid documents, medical history, everything a normal child should have. And I want it to be impossible to trace back to me until everything is finalized." Over the following weeks, while the investigators worked on the documents, the businessman maintained his routine of daily visits, pretending to still be considering the stepmother's proposal. But now he watched everything with different eyes, cataloging every detail of the pair's routine, looking for an opportunity to act. It was during this period of intensive surveillance that the second major twist happened. Hidden behind a pile of rubble, the millionaire overheard a telephone conversation that completely changed his understanding of the situation. The stepmother wasn't talking to the girl's buyers, she was talking to someone about the other one. "Yes, the twin sister," she said on the phone, pacing back and forth nervously. "She's in the south part of the city with a family that pays much less than you do, but if you want both of them together, it's going to cost double." The businessman felt the world spin around him. There was a second child, a twin sister, living in equally terrible conditions somewhere in the city. The girl he had spent months trying to save wasn't alone in the world. There was another child, probably going through the same horrors, completely out of his reach. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of two identical children, separated and exploited by different people, tormented him. His mission, which already seemed impossible, had become doubly complex. He couldn't save one sister knowing that he would leave the other behind. The next morning, he directly confronted the stepmother about this discovery. "I heard you talking about a sister," he said bluntly. "Where is she?" The woman looked at him with surprise, clearly not expecting him to know this information. For a moment she hesitated, but then her calculating smile returned. "Oh, you found out," she said with false shame. "It's just that there were two of them when I found them, but it was too difficult to take care of both of them alone, so I left one with some acquaintances who also needed help with money." "Who are these people? Where do they live?" "That's going to cost extra," she replied immediately. "Valuable information like that isn't free." The third obstacle arose when the businessman realized that he was being manipulated on an even larger scale than he had imagined. The stepmother had orchestrated a complex system of exploitation, using the two sisters as pieces in a cruel game of emotional blackmail. Every time he showed genuine interest in helping, she revealed another layer of suffering that he felt compelled to resolve. Over the following days, he paid progressively larger amounts to obtain information about the location of the second girl. Each revelation came with new demands, new costs to keep both children safe. His bank account, built through years of careful investments in the financial market, was being systematically drained. The final information came with a price that even the millionaire considered excessive, but he paid anyway. The twin sister was living on the other side of the city, with a couple who forced her to work in a junkyard, separating metals and carrying materials too heavy for her age. The conditions were different, but equally cruel. Determined to see the second child with his own eyes, the businessman traveled to the location indicated. What he found there left him even more horrified. The girl was physically identical to the one he knew, but her spirit seemed to have been completely broken. She moved mechanically, without the spark of life that still shone in her sister's eyes. When their eyes met, the child stared at him with a blank expression, without curiosity or hope. It was like looking at a ghost of the girl he knew, a version destroyed by systematic cruelty. At that moment, he understood that saving one without the other would be like condemning half of a soul to eternal darkness. That night, the millionaire locked himself in his office and began to develop a plan that would use all the resources at his disposal. He could no longer think in terms of negotiation or payments. He needed to orchestrate a rescue operation that would free both children simultaneously. The plan that took shape in his mind was risky and complex, but it was the only way to break the cycle of exploitation without further fueling the cruel system he had discovered. It would involve feigning interest in an official adoption of the two girls, using his business contacts to create valid legal documentation, and coordinating a transfer that would remove the children from their exploiters before anyone realized what was happening. But first, he needed to solve a fundamental problem: how to explain to a 4-year-old child that she had a twin sister from whom she had been separated since she was a baby. And more importantly, how to prepare both girls for a reunion that could be as traumatic as it was liberating. The answer came unexpectedly through Ivy herself. During one of his visits, she asked a question that completely surprised him. "Pretty mister," she said, playing with some colorful buttons he had brought, "sometimes I dream about a girl who has the same face as me. Do you think that means anything?" The businessman felt tears burning his eyes. Even physically separated, the sisters maintained some kind of deep connection that transcended their desperate situation. It was as if their twin souls sought each other through dreams, keeping alive the hope of a reunion. "It might be," he replied carefully. "Sometimes our dreams show us important things that we can't understand yet." At that moment, watching the girl's thoughtful expression, the millionaire knew he was making the right decision. Whatever it cost, using all the resources of his fortune, built through investments and successful businesses, he would reunite those two lost souls and give them the chance to be happy together. The preparation to reunite the twin sisters demanded from the businessman a complexity of planning that surpassed any business negotiation he had ever conducted. He spent weeks coordinating every detail, using his experience in managing multiple companies to orchestrate an operation that would involve perfect timing and considerable resources from his accumulated wealth. The first challenge was to create a legal identity for both children simultaneously. His investigators worked day and night to establish retroactive birth records that could withstand any official verification. The cost of this operation was equivalent to the value of one of his smaller investments in real estate funds, but he did not hesitate to authorize the expenses. During this period of preparation, the millionaire maintained his routine of visits, but now he observed everything with the precision of a military strategist. He catalogued the exact times each of the stepmothers left home, mapped the routes they used, and identified the moments when the girls were most vulnerable and accessible. The third major twist came completely unexpectedly. During one of his investigations into the family that was exploiting the second girl, he discovered something that changed his entire perspective on the children's origin. One of the investigators brought information that left him in a state of shock. "Sir," said the man, spreading photographs on the table, "we found the girl's biological mother. She didn't disappear as we thought. She's been in a rehab clinic for 2 years, recovering from drug addiction." The businessman examined the images with growing surprise. The young woman in the photographs seemed to have completely transformed. Where before there had been a thin, lost-looking teenager, now there was a healthy person with clear eyes and a determined expression. "She's been clean for 2 years," continued the investigator. "She works at the clinic as a counselor for other addicts, and she's been constantly asking about the daughters she was forced to abandon." "Does she know where the girls are?" asked the millionaire, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. "No. When she was using drugs, she gave the babies to different people who promised to take care of them temporarily. She never imagined they would be separated and exploited. The letter she wrote even expressed her wish to get them back as soon as she was well." The discovery that the girls had a living mother who was in the process of recovering added a completely new dimension to the problem. The businessman found himself confronted with a complex moral dilemma. Did he have the right to separate 2 children from their biological mother, even if his intentions were to protect them? That night, he spent hours reading and rereading the letter the mother had left. Written in shaky but sincere handwriting, it expressed a deep love for her daughters and an unwavering determination to overcome addiction to be able to raise them properly. "My little ones," said a passage that particularly touched him, "if one day you read this, I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest decision of my life. But I preferred that you have a chance to grow up safe than stay with me while I was sick. I promise I will heal and come back to get you. Mommy loves you more than her own life." The letter had been written 3 years ago, when the girls were just babies. Throughout this time, while they suffered at the hands of cruel exploiters, their mother had fought against chemical dependency, motivated by the dream of reuniting her family. The fourth obstacle arose when the businessman realized that his rescue operation might be interfering with the legal right of a recovered mother to have her daughters back. His lawyers were clear about the implications. If the biological mother was truly clean and stable, she would have absolute legal priority over any attempt at adoption by third parties. But as the days passed, the urgency of the situation did not allow hesitation. The stepmother had scheduled the delivery of the first girl for the following week, and the couple exploiting the second were planning to move to another state, taking the child with them. If he did not act immediately, he would lose the opportunity to save the girls, regardless of who had legal rights over them. The most difficult decision of his life came when he realized that he needed to choose between following the law and saving 2 lives. His business principles, built on solid foundations of legality and ethics, came into direct conflict with his human compassion and sense of urgency. It was during this internal crisis that something happened that completely changed his perspective. Ivy approached him during one of his visits, carrying a drawing she had made with pieces of charcoal found in the trash. "Look what I drew," she said with childish pride, showing a dirty paper where 2 small figures were holding hands. "It's me and my dream sister playing together." The businessman examined the rudimentary but emotionally powerful drawing. Even without consciously knowing of the existence of her twin sister, Ivy had created a visual representation of what her heart most desired, not to be alone in the world. "You would really like to have a sister, wouldn't you?" he asked carefully. "More than anything," she replied, her big eyes shining with hope. "Sometimes I get sad because I don't have anyone to play with, but in my dreams there's always a girl just like me who wants to be my friend." At that moment, watching the child's dreamy expression, the millionaire made his final decision. Legal complications or personal risks didn't matter. He would reunite the sisters and then deal with the consequences. If the biological mother was truly recovered and wanted her daughters back, he would help her get them back. But first, he needed to get them out of the hands of their exploiters. The final plan involved a coordinated operation that would utilize his entire network of business contacts. He hired a team of professionals specializing in family relocation, financed emergency documentation through accelerated legal channels, and prepared a safe house where the girls could stay temporarily while the legal situation was resolved. But there was an element in the plan that worried him deeply. How would the two girls, who had been separated since babies and experienced different traumas, react to the reunion? And more importantly, how would he explain to them that there was a biological mother who was struggling to get them back? The answer came when he decided to be completely honest with Ivy. During his last visit before the execution of the plan, he knelt in front of her and held her small hands. "I have something very important to tell you," he said, choosing each word carefully. "Remember your dreams with the girl who has the same face as you. She's real, and I'm going to take you both to a safe place where you can finally meet." The girl's eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and pure joy. "Is it really true? I really have a sister? It's true. And you also have a mommy who's working hard to get strong and healthy, just so she can take care of you both." For a moment, the child was silent, processing information that completely changed her understanding of the world. Finally, she smiled, the first genuinely happy smile he had seen on her face since he had met her. "When am I going to meet them?" she asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "Very soon," promised the businessman. Very soon. The execution of the rescue plan required a military precision that tested all the limits of the millionaire's business experience. He coordinated a complex operation involving multiple teams, accelerated legal documentation, and a substantial amount of his investments converted into liquid cash for emergencies. His dividends from international stocks and profits from cryptocurrencies had never been used for something so risky and emotionally intense. On the morning marked for the operation, the businessman woke up before dawn with his heart pounding. For months, he had become obsessed with saving one girl. Now, he was preparing to rescue two children and potentially confront an entire system of child exploitation that he had discovered to be much more complex than he had imagined. The first phase of the plan began at 6 in the morning. While the first girl's stepmother slept in her shack, still under the influence of the previous night's alcohol, a team of specialized social workers approached discreetly. The businessman had used his influence and financial resources to accelerate a legal process that would normally take months, creating a temporary protection order that would allow the immediate removal of the child. Simultaneously, on the other side of the city, a second team was acting in the junkyard where the twin sister worked. The timing needed to be perfect. Any delay would allow one of the groups of exploiters to alert the other, putting the entire plan at risk. The businessman personally accompanied the rescue of Ivy. When she saw him approaching, accompanied by uniformed people, her eyes filled with fear, an instinctive reaction after years of associating authority figures with punishment and pain. "It's okay," he whispered, kneeling down to be at her height. "Remember what we talked about? Today you're going to meet your sister." The transformation in the child's face was instantaneous. The fear dissolved, replaced by a cautious excitement that illuminated her delicate features. For the first time in months, she smiled without reservations, trusting completely in the words of the man who had become her only source of kindness in the world. "Can I take my drawings?" she asked, pointing to a collection of dirty papers where she had scribbled during the long hours of waiting on the street. "Of course you can. We're going to take everything that's important to you." The stepmother woke up with the movement and immediately began to scream, demanding explanations and threatening to sue everyone involved. But the legal documents were in order, and her own reputation in the community worked against her. Many neighbors had witnessed the mistreatment and were willing to support the girl's removal. "This is theft," she shouted, trying to block the rescue team's passage. "This girl is my responsibility. You can't just take her." The businessman watched the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. The woman who had tortured an innocent child for years now showed her true face, not that of a concerned caregiver, but of someone who saw the girl only as valuable property being confiscated. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the second operation faced unexpected complications. The twin sister had developed a complex psychological bond with her exploiters, a form of Stockholm syndrome that made her actively defend the people who mistreated her. When the rescue team approached, she hid behind the man who forced her to work in the junkyard. "I don't want to go," she repeated in a monotonous voice, clinging to the exploiter's dirty clothes. "Here is my home. These people are strangers." The child psychologist accompanying the team explained to the businessman through radio communication that this reaction was common in cases of prolonged exploitation. The child had developed survival mechanisms that made her consider any change as a potential threat. "She will need specialized time and care to understand that she is being saved, not kidnapped," explained the professional. "The trauma may have altered her perception of safety and danger." The fifth significant obstacle arose when the businessman realized that the two girls, despite being identical twins, had developed completely different personalities as a result of their distinct traumatic experiences. Ivy maintained a spark of hope and curiosity, while her sister had become withdrawn and suspicious of any new person. The meeting of the sisters took place in a safe house that the millionaire had prepared especially for this situation. It was a neutral place, far from both the places of exploitation and his own luxurious environment, decorated simply but warmly with toys appropriate for 4-year-old children. When the two girls finally saw each other face to face, the reaction was different from what anyone had predicted. Instead of instant recognition or joy, there was a moment of tense silence while they studied each other, as if they were looking into distorted mirrors of their own experiences. The first girl, more extroverted, took the first step. "You're the girl from my dreams," she said simply, extending her small hand towards her sister. The second child hesitated for a long moment, her eyes moving between her sister and the adults around her. Finally, with cautious movements, she touched the outstretched hand. The physical contact seemed to awaken something deep in her memory, a connection that had remained dormant during the years of separation. "I dream about you too," she whispered, her first spontaneous words since the rescue. The businessman watched this meeting with tears in his eyes, realizing that he had witnessed something deeply significant. Two souls that had been brutally separated were reconnecting, not through logic or explanations, but through an emotional bond that transcended their individual traumatic experiences. But the joy of the moment was interrupted by an urgent call from his lawyers. The girl's biological mother had found out about the rescue and was demanding immediate access to her daughters. She had left the rehab clinic against medical advice and was on her way to the safe house, accompanied by a social worker and her own lawyers. "Sir," said his lead lawyer over the phone, "the legal situation has just become significantly more complicated. The biological mother has prior legal rights, and our temporary custody can be challenged at any time." The sixth obstacle arose when the businessman understood that he had spent months planning the rescue of the girls, but had not adequately prepared a plan for what would happen next. The children's mother was technically recovered and had a legal right to her daughters, but the girls didn't know her and might see her as another threatening stranger. As the afternoon progressed, the tension in the safe house increased. The two sisters had begun to interact more naturally, playing together for the first time in their lives when they were informed that their biological mother was coming to visit them. "Our real mommy?" asked Ivy, looking at the businessman in confusion. "But I thought she had gone away forever." "She never went away from her heart," he replied carefully. "She was sick and needed to stay in a special place until she was good enough to take care of you both." The second girl, even more suspicious, hid behind her sister. "I don't want more strange people," she murmured. "I just want to stay with my sister." At that moment, the millionaire realized that his mission to save one child had transformed into something much more complex and delicate. He was not just reuniting a family, he was trying to heal deep wounds that could take years to heal completely. The arrival of the biological mother at the safe house created an atmosphere of tension that the businessman had never experienced, not even during his most difficult negotiations in the financial market. He watched through the window as a young woman, approximately 20 years old, got out of a car accompanied by a social worker and a lawyer. Her movements were nervous but determined, and even from a distance it was possible to see the physical resemblance to the two girls. The young mother had completely transformed since the old photographs he had seen. Her hair was clean and well-groomed, she had gained healthy weight, and her eyes, once lost and empty, now shone with a mixture of anxiety and desperate hope. She wore simple but clean clothes, and carried a small bag with gifts she had bought for her daughters. "Are they here?" were her first words upon entering the house, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Are my girls really here?" The businessman introduced himself formally, but before he could explain the situation, she interrupted him with a direct question that revealed how much she had researched about recent events. "Are you the man who paid to get them out of those terrible people?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Did you save my daughters?" The gratitude in her voice was so genuine that the millionaire felt uncomfortable. For months he had seen himself as a savior, but now, confronted with the children's true mother, he questioned whether his actions had been heroic or simply a sophisticated form of interference. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied modestly. "They needed help." "No," she said firmly, wiping away her tears. "Many people saw them on the streets and pretended it wasn't their problem. You are different." The child psychologist accompanying the case suggested that the first meeting between mother and daughters be carefully supervised. The girls were prepared gradually, through gentle conversations about the special mommy who got sick but was now better. When the two children finally saw their biological mother, the reaction was different for each one. Ivy, always more curious and confident, approached timidly, studying the woman's face with childish attention. "Are you our real mommy?" she asked, her head slightly tilted. "Yes, I am, my little princess," replied the mother, kneeling down to be at the children's height. "I know you don't remember me, but I never forgot you for a second." The second girl remained hidden behind her sister, watching the scene with suspicion. Her months of trauma had created a psychological barrier against any adult figure, including her own mother. The most touching moment happened when the mother began to sing a lullaby that she had invented during her pregnancy. Instinctively, both girls stopped moving, as if something deep in their oldest memories was being awakened. It was a connection that transcended time and trauma, a cellular memory of the time they had been safe in the womb. "I used to sing this to you when you were babies," she said softly, "every night before bed." Ivy took a step forward. "Can I touch your face?" she asked with childish innocence. "Of course you can, my love." When the little girl touched her mother's face, something magical happened. The tears that ran down the woman's cheeks seemed to break the last barrier of resistance of the child, who finally allowed herself to be embraced for the first time in 3 years. But the businessman knew that this touching moment was just the beginning of a much more complex process. During the following days, while observing the interactions between mother and daughters, he discovered that the family situation was more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The mother, despite having overcome her chemical addiction, still faced significant challenges in rebuilding her life. She lived in a small boarding house on the outskirts of the city, worked part-time in a diner, and her income barely covered her own basic needs. Raising 2 traumatized children would require financial and emotional resources that she simply did not possess. "I want them back more than anything in the world," she confessed to the businessman during a private conversation. "But I'm afraid I'm not good enough. What if they need things that I can't give?" The 7th obstacle arose when it became clear that simply reuniting the family would not solve the deep problems that had developed. The girls would need specialized therapy, medical care to treat the physical after-effects of the abuse, proper education, and a stable environment that would allow their emotional recovery. It was during these reflections that the millionaire made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of simply handing the children over to their biological mother and considering his mission accomplished, he offered something that would change the destiny of the entire family. "What if I helped the 3 of you start over together?" he proposed during a meeting with everyone involved, not as a charity, but as an investment in these children's future. The mother looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of help?" "A suitable home where you can live safely. Resources for therapy and education for the girls, and maybe a better job for you, something that allows you to take care of them properly." "And what would you gain from that?" she asked directly. The question touched on the heart of the matter that the businessman himself had been avoiding. For months he had convinced himself that his motivations were purely altruistic, but now he recognized that there was something deeper involved. "Honestly," he said after a long silence, "I lost my wife 2 years ago. Since then, my life has been just work and money. Helping your daughters gave me a purpose I didn't know I needed." "Do you want to be part of our family?" asked Ivy with the typical frankness of children. The question caught all the adults off guard. The businessman found himself confronted with a possibility he had never consciously considered, not just saving the children, but genuinely becoming part of their lives. "If you want me to," he replied carefully, "I would really like to be like a special uncle who will always be here when you need me." The mother was silent for a long moment, studying the face of the man who had saved her daughters. Finally, she asked a question that revealed her own emotional maturity developed during the years of recovery. "Do you understand that they are my daughters, that I am their mother, even having made mistakes in the past?" "I understand completely," he replied. "I would never try to replace you, but perhaps we can create an extended family where everyone looks out for each other." It was at that moment that something happened no one had foreseen. The second girl, who had remained silent and wary throughout the conversation, finally spoke. "Can I have a mom and a rich heart dad?" she asked with childlike earnestness. "Then I'll have more people to protect me." The brutal simplicity of the question revealed what truly mattered to a child who had spent years without adequate protection. She didn't care about complex legal or social issues. She just wanted to ensure she would never be vulnerable and alone again. At that moment, watching the 2 girls looking hopefully at the adults around them, Sterling understood that his journey was far from over. Saving the children had been just the first step in a much longer and more complex process of building an unconventional yet deeply loving family. Creating such a family required Sterling to completely reorganize his priorities and financial resources. He used a considerable portion of his investments in stocks and real estate to purchase a spacious house in a secure neighborhood where the biological mother and two girls could restart their lives far from the traumatic memories of the streets. During the initial weeks of adaptation, Sterling discovered that building family bonds was infinitely more complex than any business negotiation. Each day brought new emotional challenges that tested his patience and understanding in ways his experience in wealth management had never prepared him for. The two sisters, despite being twins, continued to react in completely different ways to their new environment. The first girl adapted quickly, exploring every room of the new house with growing curiosity, asking questions about everything she saw, and gradually beginning to call Sterling "Heart Dad" in a natural way. The second child, however, remained cautious and withdrawn. She hid behind her mother whenever Sterling approached, slept on the floor instead of the comfortable bed that had been prepared for her, and refused to eat any food she hadn't seen being prepared. Her months working at the junkyard had created survival mechanisms that were difficult to overcome. "She's going to need a lot of time," explained the child psychologist during one of her weekly visits. Children who have experienced severe trauma sometimes develop what we call hypervigilance. She's constantly assessing potential threats, even in a safe environment. The eighth obstacle arose when it became clear that the biological mother, despite being clean from drugs, still struggled with deep feelings of guilt and inadequacy. She constantly questioned every decision related to her daughters, seeking Sterling's approval for basic things like what clothes to buy or what food to prepare. "I don't know how to be a mother," she confessed during a particularly difficult afternoon after one of the girls had a nightmare. "I lost 3 years of their lives. What if I can't make up for that lost time?" Sterling, who had learned during his years in the business world to identify and solve structural problems, realized that he needed to address not only the children's needs, but also help the mother rebuild her confidence and parental skills. He hired a family therapist specializing in reunification after trauma, enrolled the mother in vocational training courses so she could have a more stable career, and established a routine of regular visits that would allow the family to develop gradual independence. During this period, Sterling experienced a personal transformation that even he hadn't anticipated. His mornings, which were once dedicated exclusively to analyzing financial reports and planning investments, now included breakfast with his improvised family, help with homework, and conversations about the girls' fears and dreams. The first girl became especially close to him, developing the habit of saving her discoveries and drawings to show him during his visits. She had started attending a private school, where she was excelling in art and math, and always had lively stories to tell about her classmates and teachers. "Heart Dad," she said one afternoon, showing him a colorful drawing. "I drew our family. Look, there's Mommy, me, my sister, and you, and here's a big house where everyone fits." Sterling examined the drawing with growing emotion. On paper, he appeared not as a rich man doing charity, but as a genuine member of the family, smiling alongside the people who had become more important to him than all his material possessions. But it was the second girl who provided the most significant moment of the entire process. During a visit 3 months after the rescue, she finally approached him spontaneously for the first time. "Heart Dad," she said in her small voice, extending an object she had been hiding behind her back, "I made this for you." It was a small sculpture made from pieces of metal that she had carefully shaped. A skill developed during her months forced at the junkyard, but now used to create something beautiful instead of just functional. The piece represented 2 birds flying together, clearly symbolizing her and her sister. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever received," he said sincerely, holding the sculpture as if it were made of gold. "Can I keep it in my office?" For the first time since he had met her, the girl smiled genuinely. "You can. So you'll remember us when you're working." The moment marked a pivotal turning point in the family's relationship. From that point on, both girls began to see him not as a benevolent stranger, but as a constant and reliable presence in their lives. The mother had also begun to develop professionally and emotionally. The training course that Sterling had financed qualified her for a job as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized company, where she quickly excelled because of her dedication and responsibility. For the first time in years, she was able to support her family with dignity, even if she still needed occasional support for major expenses like the girls' education and healthcare. During a family meeting to discuss the children's progress, the psychologist brought information that changed everyone's perspective on the future. "The girls are developing exceptionally well," she reported, showing charts and assessments. "The first is academically advanced for her age, and the second is overcoming her emotional difficulties much more quickly than we expected." "Does that mean they're healed?" asked the mother, hopeful. "Healing is an ongoing process," explained the professional, "but they have developed resilience and healthy coping mechanisms. More importantly, they have a stable family base that will continue to support their growth." Sterling felt a profound satisfaction upon hearing these words. For years, he had measured success through profits and wealth growth. Now he discovered that true success could be found in the smile of a child who finally felt safe, or in the growing confidence of a mother who had overcome her past failures. But it was during a casual conversation that he received the greatest reward of his entire journey. The first girl, now 5 years old and much more articulate, made an observation that deeply touched his heart. "You know, Heart Dad," she said while coloring a new book, "before you came along, I thought rich people were bad. But you proved that people with a lot of money can choose to be good." "And what does that teach you?" he asked, curious about her child's perspective. "That it doesn't matter how much money you have. It matters what you do with it to help other people." At that moment, Sterling understood that he had received an invaluable education from a 5-year-old child. His wealth, built through successful investments and businesses, had finally found its true purpose, not just accumulating more capital, but creating opportunities for other people to thrive and be happy. As the months passed, the family routine settled in naturally. The girls attended school, had therapy when needed, and enjoyed a childhood that included playtime, outings, and above all, the security of knowing they were loved unconditionally. The mother continued to grow professionally and personally, developing the confidence she had lost during her years of addiction. She established healthy boundaries, made independent decisions about her daughter's education, and gradually became the strong and capable mother she had always had the potential to be. 6 months after the girls' rescue, a new, unexpected twist shook the stability that the family had carefully built. During a routine visit to the children's school, the principal called Sterling and the mother in for an urgent conversation that would completely change their understanding of the girls' past. "We have a delicate situation," said the educator, nervously adjusting her glasses. "One of our teachers recognized the twins. She used to work in another district where she met a third child who may be their sister." Sterling felt the blood run cold in his veins. "A third sister?" "Triplets, actually. The teacher remembers clearly because it was a case that deeply affected her. 3 identical babies were separated in the hospital about 4 years ago. She followed one of the children when she worked as a volunteer at a temporary shelter." The girl's mother covered her face with her hands, tears streaming between her fingers. "I didn't know," she whispered. "When I gave birth, I was under the influence of drugs. I couldn't think straight. I only remembered 2 babies crying." The revelation that there was a third child lost somewhere in the city brought a desperate urgency back into Sterling's life. For months, he had become accustomed to the tranquil routine of the reunited family, focusing on his investments and observing the girls grow healthy and happy. Now, confronted with the possibility that a third sister was still suffering, all his inner peace vanished. "Where is this child now?" he asked, already mentally calculating the resources he would need to mobilize for a new rescue operation. "We don't know," admitted the principal. "The teacher lost contact with the case when she changed jobs, but she has some old names and addresses that may help in the investigation." That night, Sterling locked himself in his office and reactivated his entire network of private investigators. The money he had been investing in cryptocurrencies and stocks was quickly converted to finance an intensive search for the third girl. He knew that every day of delay could mean more suffering for an innocent child. The two girls, who were already safe, reacted to the news differently. The first was extremely excited about the possibility of having another sister, asking constant questions about when they could meet her and planning all the games they would play together. The second girl, however, demonstrated a more complex reaction. She had finally adapted to the current family dynamic and seemed worried about how a new person could alter the balance that they had worked so hard to establish. "What if she doesn't like me?" she asked with genuine concern. "What if she wants my bed or my toys?" The mother hugged her daughter tenderly. "Love doesn't diminish when it's divided," she explained patiently. "When we have more people to love, our hearts only get bigger and stronger." The investigation to find the third child proved to be more complicated than the previous ones. For 4 years, the girl had passed through multiple foster families and care situations, creating a confusing trail of partial documentation and contradictory information. The first major obstacle arose when the investigators discovered that the child had been officially adopted by a family that had subsequently moved to another state. The legal records indicated that the adoption had been processed correctly, but there were inconsistencies in the documentation that suggested possible fraud. "The family that adopted her may have used false documentation," explained the lead investigator during a tense meeting in Sterling's office. "There are indications that they are involved in a larger scheme of illegal adoptions." "Adoption scheme?" asked Sterling, feeling a familiar anger growing in his chest. "Families that officially adopt children, but then use them for child labor or other forms of exploitation. It's more sophisticated than what the girls faced before, but equally cruel." The second significant twist came when they discovered the third girl's current location. She was living with a seemingly respectable family in a city 500 miles away, but information collected discreetly revealed a disturbing reality. The child was being forced to care for other younger children in the family, do heavy housework, and sleep in an attic without adequate heating. Officially, she was a beloved adopted daughter, but in practice, she was treated as a domestic servant. "She doesn't even know she has sisters," reported the investigator after a week of discreet surveillance. "The family told her that she was abandoned because she was too problematic, and that she should be grateful for having been saved by them." Sterling spent sleepless nights planning how to approach this situation, which was infinitely more complex than the previous ones. The third girl was legally protected by an official adoption, living with people who maintained a facade of respectability, in another state where he had no contacts or influence. During this period of intensive planning, something unexpected happened at home. The two girls began to have simultaneous dreams about a third child crying alone in a dark place. The synchronization of these dreams was so precise that even the family psychologist was intrigued. "It's possible that there is an emotional connection between triplets that transcends physical distance," she explained. "Cases like this are rare but documented in the scientific literature." The first girl described her dreams with disturbing details. "She's in a place with wooden stairs that make noise. There's a tiny window, but she can't reach it. And she's always hungry." The description corresponded exactly to the observations that the investigators had made about the attic where the third girl slept. It was as if the sisters were sharing experiences through some mystical channel that science had not yet fully understood. The girl's mother, strengthened by months of therapy and personal growth, made a decision that surprised Sterling. "We're going to get her," she said with steely determination. "No matter what it takes. None of my daughters will continue to suffer while I can do something to prevent it." The ninth obstacle arose when it became clear that a traditional legal approach would be impossible in this case. The adoptive family had official documentation, a reputation in the community, and their own resources to defend themselves. Any formal accusation would require concrete evidence of abuse, which was difficult to obtain without exposing the investigation. It was then that Sterling had an idea that would use his business skills in a completely new way. Instead of trying to confront the family directly, he would create an irresistible opportunity that would lead them to voluntarily hand over the child. What if we offered them something that was worth more than the free labor they get from the girl? He proposed during a strategic meeting. Greedy people always have a price. The plan he developed was risky, but elegant in its simplicity. He would pose as a businessman interested in hiring the family for a lucrative project that would require a move to another country. As part of the benefits package, he would offer to temporarily care for the adopted child, claiming that she would hinder the concentration needed for the work. During the weeks of preparation to execute this plan, the tension in the family's home grew. The two girls instinctively felt that something important was happening, even without fully understanding the details. The second girl, who had become more expressive as the months passed, made an observation that deeply touched Sterling's heart. "Heart, Dad," she said one night before going to sleep, "thank you for never giving up on us. Even when it's hard." The simple gratitude of that child, who had learned to trust again after so much trauma, reinforced Sterling's determination to complete his mission. No matter how many obstacles arose or how much of his fortune he needed to invest, he would reunite the three sisters and give them the chance to grow up together, safe and loved. The execution of the plan to rescue the third girl required Sterling to give a performance worthy of an actor and to coordinate using all his resources from his experience in international businesses. He spent weeks creating a false corporate identity, establishing contacts in other countries, and developing a job proposal so attractive that it would be impossible for a greedy family to refuse. Using a considerable portion of his investments in gold and international market investments, he financed the creation of a fictitious consulting company that supposedly helped American families establish themselves in lucrative emerging markets. The documentation was impeccable, the website seemed authentic, and he even hired actors to pose as satisfied clients. The first contact with the adoptive family took place through a seemingly casual approach. Sterling introduced himself as a representative of the fictitious company, claiming that he had identified the adoptive father's professional profile as ideal for a unique international consulting opportunity. "Your experience in family management and home organization is exactly what our clients are looking for," he said during the first meeting, carefully observing the couple's reactions. "We are offering 2-year contracts with salaries that would triple your current income." The couple's eyes gleamed with poorly disguised greed. During the conversation, Sterling noted how they treated the third girl, who appeared briefly to serve coffee to the adults. The child moved mechanically, avoided eye contact, and was clearly accustomed to being invisible in the presence of strangers. What shocked Sterling the most was how the girl physically resembled her sisters, but her expression was completely different. Where the other two had regained the light in their eyes and their childlike curiosity, this child seemed to have a permanent shadow over her face. "The only complication," he continued carefully, "is that the destination country has strict regulations regarding underage children. It would be much easier if she could temporarily stay with a reliable American family during the contract period." "For how long?" asked the adoptive mother, clearly calculating the financial benefits versus the loss of free domestic labor. 2 years initially, but with the possibility of extension. And of course, our company would cover all the child's care expenses plus compensation for the inconvenience. The amount mentioned was strategically calculated to be irresistible. It was equivalent to what they saved exploiting the girl's labor multiplied by 5. It was a significant investment of Sterling's resources, but he considered every penny well spent. During the following weeks, he made several visits to finalize the contract details, always discreetly observing the house's routine and the treatment given to the child. What he witnessed confirmed his worst fears. The girl was treated as a servant, waking up before the other family members to prepare breakfast, cleaning the entire house, and taking care of younger children while the adults rested. The first attempt to establish direct contact with the third girl happened when he pretended to need to use the restroom during one of the meetings. He found the child alone in the kitchen, washing dishes in a sink that was too high for her height, balancing on an unstable chair. "Hi," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "What's your name?" The girl looked around nervously before responding in an almost inaudible voice. "I can't talk to strangers. I'll get in trouble." "I don't want you to get in trouble," he assured her. "I just wanted to get to know you better." For a moment she stared at him with curiosity, and Sterling could see a glimpse of the personality that had been suppressed by years of mistreatment. It was like looking through a foggy window into the soul of a child who had given up waiting for kindness. The 10th obstacle arose when it became clear that the girl had developed a deep fear of change. Her experience had taught her that any alteration in her routine usually meant punishment or worse situations. The idea of leaving the only house she knew, even if it was for something better, terrified her. During a whispered conversation in the kitchen, she revealed her biggest concern. "What if the new people are even meaner? At least here I know what to expect." Sterling felt his heart break upon hearing a 5-year-old child expressing such resignation to suffering. It was a cruel wisdom that no child should possess, the understanding that sometimes known misery is preferable to the risk of the unknown. "What if I told you that you have 2 twin sisters who are waiting to meet you?" he whispered, carefully observing her reaction. The girl's eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Real sisters, like me, exactly like you. And they dream about you every night." For the first time since he had met her, the child smiled, a small and hesitant but genuine smile. It was like seeing a flower trying to sprout in barren soil. The final negotiation with the adoptive family took place on a Saturday morning when Sterling presented all the documents for the fictitious contract. He had made the offer so lucrative that it would be financially irresponsible to refuse it, knowing that greedy people would always prioritize money over everything else. "When would you like to start?" he asked, pretending to review the papers. "The sooner the better," replied the adoptive father, barely able to hide his excitement at the prospect of easy money. "Great. I'll arrange for a temporary family to care for the girl starting next week. It's a retired teacher with experience in specialized childcare." What they didn't know was that this retired teacher was actually the biological mother of the 3 girls, who had officially qualified as a temporary caregiver through an accelerated program that Sterling had discreetly funded. During the last few days before the transfer, Sterling noticed subtle changes in the third girl. She began to ask timid questions about her twin sisters, showed curiosity about what it would be like to live with a different family, and even revealed some of her personal interests that she had kept hidden for years. "I like to draw," she confessed during their last secret conversation in the kitchen, "but I can only do it when no one is watching. They say it's a waste of time." "Your sisters love to draw too," he said, smiling. "You'll have a lot to share." On the day of the transfer, the third girl carried only a small backpack with a few clothes and a single personal treasure, a crumpled drawing she had made secretly, showing 3 figures holding hands under a radiant sun. Even without consciously knowing about her sisters, she had dreamed about them long enough to include them in her art. The most emotional moment arrived when the car approached the house where her sisters were waiting. The two girls were glued to the window, anxiously watching the arrival of the sister they knew only through shared dreams. When the third girl got out of the car and saw her two sisters running towards her, her reaction was unlike anything Sterling had ever witnessed. There was no hesitation or fear, just an instant and profound recognition, as if separated parts of a soul were finally reuniting. "I knew you were real," she said simply, hugging her sisters for the first time in 5 years. The mother, watching the reunion of her 3 daughters, cried tears of joy and relief. "My family is complete," she whispered, embracing all 3 girls simultaneously. Sterling watched the scene with a deep satisfaction that transcended any business success he had ever achieved. Using his fortune built through investments in stocks, funds, and cryptocurrencies, he had achieved something that no amount of money could directly buy: the reunion of a shattered family and the restoration of hope in 3 little lives that had suffered too much. But there was still one last surprise waiting for them all, a discovery that would forever change their understanding of the true meaning of family and sacrifice. The reunion of the 3 sisters brought a completely new dynamic to the family that Sterling had helped rebuild. During the first weeks, he watched fascinated as the girls adapted to each other, developing a language of their own and connections that seemed to transcend their individual traumatic experiences. The house he had bought for the family needed to be reorganized to accommodate 3 children with different specific needs. Each girl brought her own coping mechanisms and unique traumas that needed to be carefully managed. His investments in specialized education funds and family therapy tripled, but Sterling considered every penny an investment in the future. The first girl, always the most extroverted, naturally assumed the role of leader among the sisters, helping the newly arrived third to adapt to the new reality of safety and love. She shared her toys without hesitation, taught her the rules of the house, and above all, showed through example that it was safe to trust the adults who were now caring for them. The second girl, who had overcome her own emotional barriers in the previous months, found a new purpose in protecting her most traumatized sister. She recognized in the third child the same fear and distrust that she had felt, and used her own recovery experience to offer comfort and understanding. But it was the third girl who brought the biggest surprises to the family. Despite having endured the worst abuse, she possessed an emotional wisdom and artistic ability that impressed everyone around her. Her drawings, now created freely and with suitable materials, revealed a depth of perception that went beyond her chronological age. During a particularly significant afternoon, she showed Sterling a drawing she had made of the 3 sisters. But this time, there was a 4th figure on the paper, a tall man in a suit who was holding the hands of the 3 girls. "That's you, Heart Dad," she explained shyly. "You're part of our family now, too." Sterling studied the drawing with growing emotion. During all these months, he had focused on reuniting and protecting the girls, without fully realizing how they had adopted him as a father figure in their lives. It was a responsibility he had not consciously sought, but that he now recognized as the most important thing he had ever undertaken. The girl's mother had also transformed dramatically since the beginning of the journey. Confronted with the need to care for 3 traumatized daughters, she developed an inner strength and parenting skills that surprised even the therapists. Her job as an administrative assistant had evolved into a supervisory position, and she was considering going back to school to specialize in social work. "I want to help other families like ours," she confessed during a conversation with Sterling. "I want to use our experience to make a difference in the lives of other children who are suffering." It was during this conversation that a twist occurred that would fundamentally change the direction of the entire story. The mother revealed information that she had kept hidden since the beginning, a confession that would explain much about her motivations and past sacrifices. "There's something you need to know about me," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "About why I really started using drugs and why it was so hard to stop." Sterling encouraged her to continue, realizing that it was something deeply important. "When I found out I was pregnant with triplets, I was only 15 years old. The girl's father was an older man who promised me marriage, but disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy." She paused, gathering courage. "My own parents kicked me out of the house when they found out. They said I had dishonored the family." The story that unfolded was of a teenager abandoned by everyone around her, forced to live on the streets during a high-risk pregnancy. Drugs started as a way to cope with the physical and emotional pain, but quickly became an addiction that controlled her life. "When the girls were born, I was so lost that I couldn't even count correctly. I thought they were twins because I was always confused from withdrawal. I gave each one to different people because I thought that way they would at least have a chance to survive." Sterling listened in silence, finally understanding the magnitude of the sacrifice that this young mother had made. In her confused and desperate mind, she had tried to save her daughters in the only way she knew, giving them to others, hoping they would find the stability that she could not offer. "The ironic thing," she continued with tears in her eyes, "is that my own living conditions improved drastically after I gave the girls away. I was able to get into a recovery program, found work, and stabilize myself. But then it was too late. I didn't know where they were." The 11th twist came when she revealed that she had spent the last 2 years not only recovering from addiction, but also using every penny she earned to hire private investigators in a desperate search for her lost daughters. "I had located 2 of them," she said, showing a folder with documents and photographs. "I was planning legal action to recover them when you showed up and saved them first." Sterling examined the documents with growing surprise. The mother had assembled a solid legal case and was prepared to confront the girl's exploiters through official channels. She was not the passive victim he had imagined. She was a woman who had actively fought to rebuild her family. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" he asked. "Because I was afraid you would think I didn't deserve them back, that a mother who had abandoned her own children had no right to claim them." The revelation completely changed Sterling's perspective on the entire situation. For months, he had seen himself as the savior of the family, but now understood that he was only helping a determined mother complete a mission that she had already started on her own. That night, he reflected deeply on the events of the past months. His fortune, accumulated through investments in stocks and cryptocurrencies, had been crucial to accelerating the rescues and providing stability for the family. But the true driving force behind the girls' reunion had been the relentless love of a mother who never gave up on her daughters. The most significant transformation, however, had happened to himself. Before meeting the girls, his life had been centered exclusively on the accumulation of wealth and business success. Now his days revolved around conversations about homework, school plays, and the future dreams of 3 children who had become more important to him than all his material possessions. During a family meeting to discuss the girls' progress, the psychologist brought an assessment that confirmed what everyone had already observed. "All 3 children are developing exceptionally well," she reported. "They have created a mutual support network that is accelerating their recovery remarkably." "What about the future?" asked the mother. "Will they be able to completely overcome their traumas?" "They have already demonstrated extraordinary resilience. With continued family support and therapy when needed, I see no reason why they cannot have completely normal and happy lives." It was at this moment that Sterling made a decision that surprised even himself. For months, he had helped the family as an external benefactor, but now he realized that he wanted to be something more. He wanted to be a permanent and official part of their lives. "There's something I would like to propose," he said, looking at the mother and the three girls gathered together. "I would like to officially become part of this family. Not as a replacement for anyone, but as an addition that completes the circle." The girls reacted with immediate excitement, but it was the mother's response that determined the future of all of them. She was silent for a long moment, studying the face of the man who had become so central to their lives. "Are you sure?" she asked finally. "Being a father to three traumatized girls is not a decision that can be easily undone. I have never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied, without hesitation. Sterling's proposal to become an official part of the family brought an emotional and legal complexity that none of those involved had fully anticipated. During the following weeks, lawyers specializing in family law worked to structure an arrangement that would protect everyone's interests, especially those of the three girls who had finally found stability. The children's mother, strengthened by months of personal and professional growth, surprised everyone with a counter-proposal that revealed her emotional maturity and vision for the future. Instead of simply accepting Sterling's continued help, she suggested a true partnership that recognized both of their contributions to the girls' well-being. "If we're going to do this," she said during a serious conversation in the lawyer's office, "I want it to be as equal partners in raising them, not as a rich man helping a needy mother, but as two adults who commit equally to these children's future." Sterling was impressed by the dignity and strength of that proposal. For months, he had unconsciously assumed the role of benevolent savior, but now he was confronted with a woman who demanded respect and equality in the most important of responsibilities, raising three daughters. The girls, in turn, reacted to the discussion about formalizing the family in ways that reflected their individual developed personalities. The first child, always pragmatic despite her young age, asked direct questions about how the changes would affect her daily routine and relationships. "Does this mean Heart Dad is going to live with us?" she asked during dinner, thoughtfully chewing a piece of chicken. "It means he's going to be our real dad, besides being our heart dad," explained the mother patiently. "Nothing will change in our daily lives, but we're going to be an official family on paper too." The second girl, who had developed a deep attachment to the concept of safety and stability, expressed concern that changes could threaten the balance that they had worked so hard to build. "What if he changes his mind?" she asked, with the seriousness of someone who had learned too early that adults could disappear without warning. "What if he decides he doesn't want to be our dad anymore?" Sterling knelt in front of her, holding her small hands. "Do you remember when I promised that I was going to find your third sister?" he asked softly. "I remember. And I kept my promise, right? When I make a promise to you three, it's forever. And this is the biggest promise I've ever made in my life." The third girl, still in the process of adapting but demonstrating remarkable progress, expressed her opinion through an action that deeply touched all the adults present. During one of the family meetings, she brought a new drawing, a big house with 5 figures in front, 3 girls, a woman, and a man, all holding hands under a colorful rainbow. "This is our family," she announced simply, sticking the drawing on the refrigerator next to the other artwork of the sisters. The legal process of formal adoption proved to be more complex than expected due to the unique circumstances of the case. The 3 girls technically already had a recovered and capable biological mother, so Sterling could not unilaterally adopt them. The solution found was a civil marriage between him and the mother, followed by a joint adoption process that would formalize the family structure that already existed in practice. The decision to marry brought a new dimension to the relationship between the millionaire and the girl's mother. For months, they had worked as partners focused exclusively on the well-being of the children, but now they needed to confront their own feelings and expectations about the shared future. "We need to be honest with each other," she said during a walk in the park, while the girls played nearby. "This started as a partnership to help the children, but if we're going to get married, even if it's for practical reasons, We need to talk about what we expect from this relationship." Sterling had spent nights reflecting on exactly this question. His life had changed so drastically in the last few months that he barely recognized the cold and business-focused man he had been before meeting the girls. "Honestly," he replied, pausing to observe the three children playing together harmoniously, "I don't know if what I feel is romantic love or just a deep connection based on what we've shared. But I know I can't imagine my life without you four. It's enough for now," she said with a smile. "Maybe love will come with time, or maybe our partnership will be something different but equally valid. The important thing is that we're committed to the girls." The wedding ceremony was deliberately simple and focused on the children. Held in the garden of the house that had become the family's home, with only a few close friends and the professionals who had helped in the family reunification process. The three girls served as bridesmaids, wearing identical dresses that they themselves had chosen. The most emotional moment of the ceremony happened when the judge asked if there was anyone present who would like to speak. The first girl raised her hand shyly. "Can I say something?" she asked earnestly. "Of course you can," replied the judge, smiling. "I want to thank Dad for not giving up on us. He promised we were going to be a real family, and now we are." There wasn't a person present who wasn't moved by those simple words, which perfectly captured the extraordinary journey they had all shared. After the ceremony, during the small celebration in the garden, Sterling observed his new family with a deep satisfaction that transcended any financial success he had ever achieved. His investments in stocks, funds, and cryptocurrencies would continue to generate wealth, but now that fortune had a clear purpose, to ensure the future and happiness of the people who had become more important to him than any material possession. The third girl approached him during the party, carrying another of her artistic drawings. "I made this for you," she said, handing him a paper where she had drawn a large heart surrounded by small figures. "It's beautiful," he said, carefully examining every detail. "What does it mean?" "It means that our heart grew to fit all of us," she explained with the simple wisdom of children. During the first weeks after the wedding, the new family dynamic settled in naturally. Sterling divided his time between professional and family responsibilities, discovering that fatherhood required completely different skills from business management, but equally rewarding. He learned how to braid hair, mediate disputes between sisters, interpret children's drawings, and above all, to be consistently present in the lives of three children who had learned to value every gesture of love and attention. The mother continued to grow professionally, but now with the support of a partner who understood the importance of balancing career and family. Together, they created a domestic structure that allowed both of them to pursue their goals while ensuring that the girls always had the attention and care they needed. 6 months after the wedding, during a follow-up meeting with the family psychologist, they received official confirmation that the three girls had not only recovered from their past traumas, but were flourishing in ways that exceeded all professional expectations. "It's rare to see such a complete transformation," commented the therapist, reviewing her notes. "The girls have developed not only emotional stability, but also a confidence and optimism that are remarkable considering their past experiences." That night, while putting the three girls to bed, a routine that had become his favorite moment of each day, Sterling reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a spilled cup of coffee and evolved into the construction of a true family. But there was still a final surprise waiting for them, a discovery that would reveal the true meaning of destiny and the transformative power of unconditional love. 1 year after the wedding, when the family had found its perfect rhythm, and the three girls were thriving in an environment of love and security, an unexpected discovery brought the most surprising and touching closure to the entire extraordinary journey they had shared. The final revelation began in a seemingly simple way during a routine medical checkup of the girls. The pediatrician, Dr. Santos, had followed the triplets' development since their rescue and was documenting their exceptional progress for an academic article on childhood trauma recovery. "There's something interesting in the girls' blood tests," he said, studying the lab results with an intrigued expression. "They have a very rare genetic marker, something that appears in less than 0.01% of the population." Sterling and his wife exchanged curious glances. "Is that worrying?" she asked. "No, it's nothing medical. In fact, it's fascinating from a genetic point of view. This specific marker is so rare that it's used in ancestry research to track very specific family lineages." Dr. Santos explained that he had decided to research more about this marker after finding it in the three girls, and his findings had led him to a national genetic database that tracked families with rare hereditary characteristics. "What I discovered will surprise you," he continued, opening a file on his computer. "There is only one other person registered in the entire country with that same genetic marker. And she lives in this city." Sterling's heart began to beat faster as the doctor turned the computer screen towards them. On the screen appeared a name that left him completely shocked. His own name, accompanied by data from an exam he had done years ago for an executive checkup. "That means," he began, unable to complete the sentence, "it means that genetically you are closely related to the girls. Very closely. Based on the markers, I would say you are their biological uncle." The silence that followed was charged with implications that none of the adults could process immediately. For more than a year, Sterling had dedicated himself to saving and raising three girls that he believed were complete strangers, moved only by compassion. Now he discovered that the blood that ran in his veins was the same that ran in the veins of the children he had chosen to call daughters. "How is that possible?" whispered his wife, holding his hand tightly. Dr. Santos consulted his notes. Based on what we know about the girl's biological mother, she mentioned that the father was an older man who promised marriage but disappeared. "Do you have any brothers?" Sterling felt the world spin around him. "I have. I had a younger brother. He disappeared about 6 years ago. He was always irresponsible, leaving home for months without giving any news. The last time I saw him, he was involved with drugs and bad company." The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a painfully clear way. His brother, lost in the world of drugs, had impregnated a vulnerable teenager and disappeared, leaving her alone with triplets who would end up on the streets. The same blood that had led his brother to addiction and irresponsibility had, through an impossible-to-predict path, led Sterling to become the savior of his own nieces. "The girls are your biological nieces," confirmed Dr. Santos. "You are blood relatives in addition to chosen family." That night, after the girls fell asleep, the couple talked late into the night about the implications of this extraordinary discovery. Sterling struggled to process the magnitude of the coincidence, or of destiny, that had led a spilled cup of coffee to reveal that the children he had saved out of compassion were actually his own lost family. "Are you going to tell them?" asked his wife. "I don't know," he admitted. "On the one hand, they deserve to know their true origin. On the other, I don't want them to feel that my love for them was based only on family obligation." "Your love has never been based on obligation," she said firmly. "You loved them as strangers, you saved them as strangers, and you became their father as strangers. The fact that they are your biological nieces is just a beautiful confirmation that some connections transcend what we can see on the surface." The decision about when and how to tell the truth to the girls was postponed for a few weeks, but the answer came naturally through the first child, who had always demonstrated an exceptional intuition about family dynamics. During a family dinner, she made a casual observation that left the adults speechless. "Heart, Dad," she said, using the affectionate term she had created for him, "sometimes I look in the mirror and I see your eyes on my face." The second girl nodded enthusiastically. "It's true. especially when you smile. It looks like we have the same smile." The third girl, who had become the most artistic of the three, added her own observation. "That's why I always knew you were special to us. Even before I met my sisters, when I drew families, I always drew a man who looked like you." Confronted with the natural insight of the girls, Sterling decided it was time to share the complete truth. During a Saturday afternoon with the whole family gathered in the living room, he told the story about the lost brother, about the genetic discovery, and about how love had preceded the knowledge of their biological bonds. The reactions of the girls were typical of their individual personalities. The first was fascinated by the idea that destiny had conspired to reunite the family. The second felt even more secure, knowing that she belonged to him in two different ways. The third simply smiled and said that, "I always knew we were heart relatives. Now we find out that we are blood relatives too." But it was his wife who made the most profound observation about the whole situation. "Do you know what this really means?" she said, watching the three girls playing together in the garden. "It means that your brother, even with all his problems and failures, ended up giving you the most precious gift possible, your daughters." This perspective completely transformed how Sterling viewed the story. Instead of anger at the brother who had abandoned the children, he felt a complex gratitude for the man whose failures had, paradoxically, led to the greatest purpose of his own life. During the following months, the family flourished in ways that exceeded all expectations. Sterling had begun transforming part of his company into a foundation dedicated to helping vulnerable families, using his personal experience to identify and solve systematic problems in child protection. His financial investments in stocks, funds, and cryptocurrencies continued to grow, but now his wealth had a clear purpose that went beyond personal accumulation. He established microcredit programs for single mothers, funded drug recovery clinics, and created an emergency fund for rescues of children at risk. The three girls, now 6 years old, had become confident, curious, and loving children who showed few signs of the traumas they had faced. They attended an excellent school, participated in extracurricular activities that took advantage of their individual talents, and mainly grew up in an environment where they knew they were unconditionally loved and protected. During a special evening, 2 years after the discovery of the genetic connection, the family gathered for an intimate celebration of Our Family Day, a date they had established to commemorate the first meeting between Sterling and the girls. Seated around the dining table, each member of the family shared something for which they were grateful. When it was Sterling's turn, he looked at his wife and his 3 daughters, biological by destiny, chosen by love, and felt an emotion that transcended any success he had achieved in his career. "I am grateful," he said with an emotional voice, "for a spilled cup of coffee that changed all our lives forever, and for having learned that true wealth is not measured in dollars or investments, but in the love we share and in the difference we make in each other's lives." The first girl raised her glass of juice. "A toast to our crazy and perfect family." "To our family!" they all echoed, laughing and crying at the same time. That night, while the girls slept peacefully in their safe and comfortable rooms, Sterling went out to the garden and looked at the stars. He thought about the lost brother who would never know his daughters, about the impossible journey that had led a shattered family to reunite through love, and about the complete transformation he had experienced since that fateful afternoon on the streets. His fortune would continue to grow, his businesses would thrive, but none of that compared to the true wealth he had discovered. A family built on unconditional love, second chances, and the proof that sometimes destiny works in mysterious ways to heal broken hearts and reunite lost souls. The man who once measured success only in terms of net worth now knew that the true measure of a life well lived was sleeping safely under his roof. 3 girls who had transformed his world and taught him that true love knows no limits, neither biological nor circumstantial. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.